Tipping points are now an essential part of our understanding of the climate and nature crises. Small changes accumulate almost invisibly over time, and there comes a point when systems flip and change. Now, we understand these better perhaps in the context of negative tipping points. The changes, the steady change to the heating of the atmosphere, of the waters of the oceans, the steady accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide in water, leading to sudden changes in Arctic sea ice, in Antarctic ice shelves, of coral bleaching, of the changes to the oceans, to the land, the sudden changes that occur. But there's also a whole series of positive tipping points, the accumulation of technologies in our economies, in our society, in our cultures, that again seem to come slowly and then flip and change. The increasing numbers of solar installations on people's houses, the increase of renewables in country systems, the installation of heat pumps, the adoption of electric vehicles, the changing diets that we have, the choices that we make to garden for wildlife rather than just for show. There's a whole range of slowly accumulating positive tipping points that occur in society. Now there's a rule, a kind of guide in economics called the Pareto Rule, and we know that better as the 80-20 rule. You don't need 100% of a market or of a group of people's opinions to be reached in order for systems to shift. And the guidance is 80%, 80-20. Once you reach 80% of something, that means a system pretty well is going to flip and change. A positive tipping point we'll be searching for. So that 80% now becomes a different kind of target. It's something where we can ignore the 20% and aim for the 80. Best example, in recent times, 14 countries across the world have now exceeded 95% of their electricity system being supplied by renewables. 8 countries have reached 100%. They've gone way past that 80 because whole systems have flipped, costs have come down, actors have entered the system, the whole ball is rolling in a different kind of way. People sometimes say to me in climate classes, in the story master classes that I run, they say with more than a hint of despair, what do I do about my neighbour, my uncle, my elder relative, who somehow rejoices in saying this climate stuff's all nonsense. Nature recovery is a waste of time because what we need is economic growth. Some kinds of constructions of that sort. They're deliberate blockers of our progress as we see it. They may be deliberately enjoying the anxiety that they induce in us. And I say to people, well, you know what, just ignore them. That would be the best thing. Don't give them your eyes. Don't give them your energy as you try to plot and think about how you're going to change their viewpoints. Just leave them in that 20%. They're probably those kinds of actors. And you know what? There are a few. They're in the 5%. They're right at one end. I'm fond of saying everybody's on the climate crisis journey, on the journey towards a cooler, more abundant world. It's just that some have not yet started. They perhaps don't even know there's a journey to take. So my advice would be just ignore them. they're in that 20%. And look at the 80% and think of that territory. And this is where it's interesting that public opinion is changing really quickly. During the 2020s, it shifted in most countries of the world from the 50 to the 60% to over 80%. A study this year in 150,000 people in 50 countries showed that on average 80% plus of populations in all sorts of different countries now believe that climate change is real and that it's human caused. These two things together. Now that 80%, again, that's interesting. It's the 80-20 rule. We've got to the point where there's a flip in public opinion. That's kind of changed. But it's not quite the same when it comes to actions. Because again, if you look within that 80%, about 20%, 10 to 20% of people are taking actions already when it comes to the climate and nature crisis. They're doing stuff. They've adopted solar panels, they're using renewable energy, they're driving electric cars, they've installed heat pumps, they're gardening in particular ways, they're farming with regenerative methods. There's a whole range of things that they are doing that's already positive. And they're in that 20%, which leaves us with something like 60% of the population that we could call the climate majority. So instead of thinking of the 80-20 rule, let's think of it as the 20-60-20 rule. And think about how we can spread the ideas from the 20% who are doing stuff, small steps, accumulating those steps over time. Can we spread that into this middle 60% and change that to 50 to 40% and spread the number of people who are already doing things into that climate majority? And this kind of changes the way that we think about agency and opportunity. Ignore some, build on those who are doing stuff, give those in the kind of middle 60% the opportunity to take small steps, to cross the threshold, to get in the game, to start doing something. And as I just said, everybody's on this journey. We're going to get there one way or the other. It just might be messy, and it would be nice if it wasn't so messy. So let's imagine you're walking on the back roads and you meet a trickster. Tricksters appear in stories, and they are the characters who get us to change, to cross the threshold, to suddenly shift direction and do something different. They ring a bell and magic happens. They say an incantation. They say, I'll swap you that cow for these 5 beans, and before you know it, you're climbing the beanstalk and fighting giants and beating them. Something big happens when the trickster comes along. Well, this one says, I'll give you a choice. A large piece of cake with my curse, or a small piece of cake with my blessing. So what we could be doing is thinking about the small steps we could be taking and offer those with a kind of blessing. And this is where story comes in, because we need to tell people that this is what we're doing, that this is the kind of action that's worth taking, to use togetherness and connections with others to make this happen at a larger scale. And before we know it, transformations start to happen. They happen fast. We reach the tipping points that changed whole systems. The butterfly flaps its wings and whole systems change.